What if I told you the greatest secret of the British monarchy wasn't hidden in the vaults of Buckingham Palace, but whispered behind the closed doors of Britain's own intelligence services? What if I told you MI5 and MI6, the very agencies tasked with protecting national security, were forced to confront a question no one in the royal press corps dared to ask? Was Meghan Markle's daughter, Lilibet, truly born from her body, or was the entire world deceived? That is the question. And tonight, we're not just speculating. We're unraveling a story so bizarre, so shrouded in secrecy, that even seasoned spies raised their eyebrows. Because in a world where every royal birth is a celebrated spectacle, this one became a riddle wrapped in silence. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think back for a moment. Diana's children, greeted by the press within hours of their arrival. Kate Middleton's babies, flashed proudly on the steps of St. Mary's Hospital, cameras capturing every tiny detail. But when it came to Meghan and Harry's daughter, something changed. No proud parents standing on hospital steps. No excited cheers from the waiting press. No details that added up. Just carefully controlled statements and, later, strategically released photos. Some so carefully staged they looked more like film stills than real-life moments. Why? Why the secrecy? Why the silence? And why now, years later, are intelligence agencies allegedly stepping into the storm, dropping bombshells that could destroy not just Meghan's reputation, but the fragile thread holding the monarchy's credibility together? This isn't just gossip. This isn't just another celebrity scandal. This is about the clash between secrecy and truth, between image and reality, between a royal fairy tale and a possible fraud. And it's a story so tangled that it forces us to ask, how much do we really know about the people who shape our headlines, dominate our screens, and influence 1,000 years of royal tradition? But here's the twist. Meghan's story was never just about Meghan. It was about control. Control of the narrative. Control of the image. Control of what the world was allowed to see. Yet, for all that control, there are cracks. Cracks big enough for questions to slip through. And cracks so wide that MI5 and MI6, the ultimate guardians of Britain's secrets, reportedly saw something they could no longer ignore. Let's stop here and imagine it. Picture the briefing room. Dim lighting, leather-bound chairs, a table stacked with redacted files, marked confidential. An MI6 agent clears his throat, glances at his colleagues, and then delivers a line no one in the room expected. "We believe the Duchess may have faked her pregnancy." Unthinkable, shocking, almost cinematic. And yet, here we are, tracing a story that feels stranger than fiction. Because every time the palace tried to quiet the whispers only grew louder. Let's be honest, Meghan Markle has always thrived in the world of illusion. From Hollywood sets to red carpet interviews, she mastered the art of playing a part. But when the stage shifted from Hollywood to the monarchy, from scripts to real lives, from roles to responsibilities, did she overplay her hand? And if so, why did Harry go along with it? Was he complicit, or was he trapped in a narrative too big to fight? Imagine the weight of that silence. A husband torn between loyalty to his wife, his own truth, and the expectations of the world. This isn't just about one child. This is about legacy, dynasties, the unbroken line of the monarchy. If what MI5 and MI6 are hinting at is true, then every headline, every photo, every carefully crafted statement becomes part of one of the greatest deceptions in royal history. Ask yourself, how far would someone go to protect an image? To maintain a fairy tale at all costs? Because here's where the story twists again. Insiders whisper that the so-called Darren doll, a Hollywood-grade, hyper-realistic baby prop, was used in staged appearances. Think about that for a moment. A doll, a decoy, a surrogate story so elaborate that intelligence services felt compelled to investigate. Does it sound outrageous? Of course it does. But then again, so did the idea that a prince would step away from royal duty to chase Hollywood deals. So did the idea that the monarchy itself would be accused of racism in a primetime interview. Outrageous has become the norm when it comes to Harry and Meghan. So why now? Why would intelligence agencies risk credibility, resources, and political backlash to bring this story into the light? Because the monarchy is not just a family. It's an institution tied to national identity, global influence, and billions in economic power. If the foundation of that institution is rocked by lies, even whispers of lies, it becomes a matter of state. And let's not forget, Meghan's relationship with the press has always been a battlefield. She courted it when it served her, weaponized it when it threatened her, and abandoned it when it no longer played by her rules. But the one battlefield she could never control? The intelligence services. MI5 and MI6 don't bend to Hollywood scripts. They don't rewrite narratives. They deal in facts, surveillance, and cold, hard evidence. That's why this story matters. It's not just about gossip columns or royal watch blogs. It's about whether the fairy tale sold to the world was built on a foundation of smoke and mirrors. It's about whether the monarchy itself has been dragged into a deception it may never recover from. Now, you may be wondering, if this is true, why hasn't the palace spoken? Why hasn't the Queen's statement shattered the silence? Why hasn't Charles or William set the record straight? The answer may be as simple as this. Sometimes silence is safer than truth. Sometimes it's easier to let whispers swirl than to confront a storm that could dismantle everything. And yet, silence cannot hold forever. Because documents leak, photos surface, whistleblowers step forward, and the moment one person dares to speak, the entire narrative begins to crumble. Here's the real question. If Meghan faked her pregnancy, if Darren Dahl was part of staged appearances, if MI5 and MI6 truly have the files they claim, what happens next? Does the monarchy quietly bury the truth? Or does the truth erupt, forcing the public to reconsider everything they thought they knew? And that, my friends, is where the story begins. Because what came next, the first redacted files, the whispers of Operation Decoy, the Darren Dahl theory being linked directly to a Hollywood supplier, and the press conference no one thought would ever happen, changed everything. But what exactly did MI5 and MI6 discover in those confidential files? The answer to that question will shake not just the palace, but the world itself. What struck the world most about Meghan and Harry's daughter, Lilibet, wasn't her face, her smile, or even the tiny gown she wore in those rare glimpses. It was the silence, the utter, inexplicable absence of normal newborn fanfare. Ask yourself, when was the last time a royal birth happened without cameras at the hospital door, without reporters scrambling for the first photo, without fanfare and fan mail flooding the palace gates? For centuries, royal births were events of public celebration, meticulously documented, eagerly consumed by a global audience. Babies were introduced with ceremony, photos released with careful timing, and every milestone became a national talking point. But Lilibet? She was different. From the moment her birth was announced, the story was punctuated with absences. No hospital steps photo. No official family portrait for months. Sparse, carefully curated images that seemed almost cinematic in their control. And while the world speculated, the official line remained thin, almost evasive. Private family time, personal choice, and protecting the child's privacy were the phrases repeated ad nauseum. Yet, beneath the soothing veneer, questions began to emerge. How private can a royal child truly be in an era where paparazzi helicopters hover like drones over every estate? How can secrecy be maintained in the age of viral videos, smartphone snapshots, and relentless social media scrutiny? The silence became a kind of narrative in itself. Media outlets noted the lack of official photographs. Royal commentators speculated about delayed public appearances. Social media erupted with debates, memes, and viral threads dissecting every minor visual clue released by the couple. Observers weren't just curious, they were suspicious. They noticed inconsistencies. The timing of appearances, the angles of photos, the absence of visible growth milestones that every other royal child's public life had documented. And the more they observed, the more questions multiplied. For MI5 and MI6, this silence was more than curious. It was an anomaly. These are agencies accustomed to monitoring threats to national security, to identifying inconsistencies in intelligence reports, and to scrutinizing even the most subtle signals. To see a pattern of obfuscation, even in something as seemingly innocuous as a royal birth, was unusual. Not because the agencies cared about celebrity gossip, but because every action taken by senior members of the monarchy carries broader implications, political, economic, and social. The monarchy is not just a family, It's a global institution whose image affects diplomacy, tourism, and public trust. Any anomaly is therefore, by definition, a potential risk. So the silence around Lilibet wasn't merely puzzling, it was a red flag. Analysts noted the carefully controlled releases, images that showed the baby from specific angles, with selective lighting, often held by Meghan or Harry in a way that obscured key details. Public appearances were rare, staged, and tightly choreographed. Even statements from spokespeople seemed overly rehearsed, almost robotic, as though someone were ensuring every word adhered to a pre-approved script. And yet, the public craved more. Humans have an instinctual need to witness life, to observe growth and development. The absence of that natural storytelling caused a vacuum. Into that vacuum, speculation and rumor rushed. Bloggers, tabloid reporters, and online sleuths began to track every event, every subtle change in the narrative, looking for signs that something was amiss. Was Lilibet's absence a protective measure for her safety, or a calculated strategy to control perception? It's important to remember that secrecy in the royal family isn't new. Past generations employed private nurses, controlled media access, and even staged public appearances to create desired narratives. Yet, the difference here was scale and modern technology. In a world of smartphones, satellites, and instant information, hiding a baby completely was virtually impossible. The level of secrecy achieved in this case, therefore, raised eyebrows, not just among journalists, but among professionals trained to detect inconsistencies and assess risk. At first glance, Meghan and Harry's approach could be seen as a reasonable privacy measure. Protecting a newborn from the relentless scrutiny of the world is understandable. But the layers of control went far beyond typical privacy. Every release seemed engineered to distract, deflect, or mislead. Every absence, carefully timed. Every image, selectively framed. It was as if the child existed in a bubble, separate from reality, visible only on the couple's terms. Observers began to notice patterns that didn't align with standard behavior. For example, the limited public appearances were all strategically chosen. Events with limited press access, carefully controlled environments, and no independent verification. Images released were often in low resolution or heavily filtered, and any attempt to independently verify details, birth weight, hospital information, timing of appearances, was met with denial or deflection. In the intelligence community, anomalies like these do not go unnoticed. MI5 and MI6 are trained to read between the lines, to spot discrepancies between reported facts and observed reality. A child's public introduction is not just a family matter, it's a matter of record. It's documented, corroborated, and cross-verified. In this case, the usual documentation appeared inconsistent or deliberately opaque. Reports, hospital confirmations, and media coverage didn't line up. The question became unavoidable: why? And then there were the leaks. Whispers from unnamed insiders suggested that the couple's team was unusually controlling, sometimes even abrasive, when questioned. Requests for photographic evidence were denied. Journalists were given minimal access, and social media posts appeared orchestrated to maintain a particular narrative. For the first time, it wasn't just the media or the public noticing. It was trained intelligence professionals flagging these inconsistencies for further review. For the audience, it may be difficult to grasp the significance. After all, this isn't a traditional national security issue. Yet, in the realm of British intelligence, maintaining the credibility of institutions, even ceremonial ones, matters. The monarchy represents stability, continuity, and tradition. Anything that threatens that perception, even a potential deception about a newborn, triggers scrutiny. So what was the conclusion that drew MI5 and MI6 into this unusual investigation? Was it merely curiosity, or was there something deeper? Analysts began to map out timelines, compare photographic evidence, and cross-reference statements. They noted gaps, overlaps, and inconsistencies that suggested careful orchestration. And while they could not, initially, prove any wrongdoing, the pattern alone was enough to merit further attention. For the public, these anomalies remained subtle, almost invisible. Yet, for professionals trained to spot deception, the signs were glaring. The silence around Lilibet wasn't just privacy. It was an engineered narrative, a gap in information too precise to be coincidental. Every missing detail, every delayed appearance, every selective image created a story. And in this case, that story was not what it seemed on the surface. By the time the first whispers of intelligence interest leaked to the press, the narrative had shifted. Suddenly, speculation wasn't just gossip. It was backed by a suggestion of authority. The same agencies that protect national security were now indirectly confirming that the public should take notice. And when whispers turned to internal reports and internal reports suggested further anomalies, the stage was set for something unprecedented, a revelation that could challenge everything the world believed about Meghan, Harry, and Lilibet. But the most striking question remained. If the child was truly born in secrecy, why engineer a narrative so elaborate that it caught the attention of intelligence agencies in the first place? Was it overcaution? Or was it a cover for something entirely unexpected? And that question leads directly to the next piece of the puzzle, the Darren Dahl allegations. Because the silence around Lilibet was not just a gap, it was the first hint of a story far stranger than anyone could have anticipated. Imagine for a moment a scene so surreal that it seems lifted from a spy thriller rather than royal reportage. A meticulously staged environment, cameras angled with military precision, every detail curated to the smallest fraction of an inch. And in the center of it all, a doll. Not just any doll, but a hyper-realistic, life-sized infant prop. According to whispers from sources inside MI5 and MI6, this was not Hollywood imagination. It was a central piece of what has come to be referred to in intelligence circles as the Darren Dahl incident. The allegations are as shocking as they are detailed. Sources claim that Meghan Markle, in an effort to control the public narrative surrounding her daughter Lilibet, may have used the Darren Dahl to stage appearances, giving the impression that the child was present when in fact she was not. Think about that for a second. A fake baby, used to simulate life events that would traditionally be documented for posterity and public consumption. For decades, royal births have been a cornerstone of transparency and spectacle. A staged infant? That crosses every boundary of expectation, tradition, and public trust. The story begins with photographs. Observers noticed subtle anomalies in several released images, shadows that didn't align, fingers that appeared unnaturally stiff, expressions frozen in time. The baby seemed to remain perfectly still in context that should have elicited movement. Yawns, shifting eyes, tiny reflexive motions expected from a newborn. Initially, these discrepancies were dismissed as artistic license, or the byproduct of carefully timed shutter clicks. But as more images were analyzed, patterns emerged. The inconsistencies became too precise to ignore. Intelligence analysts, trained to detect deception in even the subtlest of forms, flagged the images for further scrutiny. Darren Dahl enters the narrative here. Allegedly sourced from a Hollywood supplier known for creating ultra-realistic infant props for film and television, the doll was reportedly used in controlled environments where the real child was not present. To the casual observer, it would appear identical to a real infant. Weight, size, and even skin tone meticulously matched. In the hands of someone skilled in presentation, the deception could go unnoticed, especially in staged photographs or brief public appearances. The implications are staggering. If true, this would mean that events thought to be documenting Lilibet's early life were, in some instances, fabricated. Public appearances that garnered headlines, statements from the palace celebrating milestones, all potentially constructed to give a controlled impression of presence, normalcy, and engagement. In other words, the world may have been watching a sophisticated illusion choreographed to perfection. Yet, why go to such lengths? Why engineer a scenario that risks discovery and international embarrassment? Analysts and observers suggest multiple motives. First, privacy. Meghan and Harry were acutely aware of the global attention that comes with royal parenthood. Every action, every photo, every statement would be scrutinized under the harshest light. A doll could, in theory, provide a layer of protection, allowing the real child to remain shielded from intrusion. Second, control of narrative. A hyper-realistic prop ensures that every public exposure is exactly as intended. No spontaneous reactions, no unplanned movement, no deviation from the script. Every image can be carefully tailored, every interaction timed and framed to convey the desired message. A healthy, happy royal child, safely in the arms of loving parents. Third, risk mitigation. Using a prop in high-risk appearances, crowded events, public gatherings, or staged photo ops would theoretically minimize the chances of an accident or exposure. In theory, if something were to go wrong, the parents would be shielded from scrutiny, the event from scandal. Yet, for all its strategic reasoning, the act carries enormous risk. The minute details are unforgiving. Anyone trained in observation, journalists, photographers, intelligence analysts, can detect anomalies. And in this case, anomalies were detected. The timing of photo releases, the angles of presentation, and the subtle but noticeable differences in skin tone, posture, and reflexive movements did not escape the attention of trained eyes. The answers are fragmented, leaked cautiously by unnamed sources, and often accompanied by caveats. But one thing is clear. The very fact that such an allegation exists and is taken seriously enough to reach intelligence briefings speaks volumes. It indicates that what was once private family management has become a matter of scrutiny, investigation, and global fascination. And it's here that the story deepens. Because if the Darren doll was deployed, it wasn't just about appearances. It represents a deliberate attempt to control perception, manipulate narrative, and create an illusion that could withstand international observation, at least temporarily. It's a tale of deception, image management, and calculated risk, all intertwined with the pressures of royal life and media scrutiny. So we are left with the question that frames the rest of this story. If appearances could be so convincingly manipulated, what else might be staged, curated, or concealed? The Darren doll is only the beginning, a symbol of the extraordinary lengths to which the stakes have escalated. And the most startling part? Intelligence insiders suggest that this revelation is just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the carefully orchestrated images, behind the staged appearances, lies a network of information, files, and evidence that could finally illuminate the truth about Lilibet and, by extension, about Meghan Markle herself. Because what came next, the secret surveillance files, internal agency memos, and corroborating details, would transform a bizarre allegation into a story that could shake the monarchy to its very core. What happens when the guardians of Britain's security start asking questions about a royal birth? Most people assume intelligence agencies focus solely on matters of espionage, terrorism, and national defense. But the British monarchy is unlike any other institution. Its image, its traditions, and its stability have national and international implications. And when anomalies surrounding Lilibet's early life began to surface, MI5 found itself reluctantly drawn into a case that straddled the line between private family matters and matters of state. The first whispers began in routine briefings. Analysts noticed that public information about the child, timing of appearances, photographic releases, statements from the palace, was inconsistent, almost impossible to reconcile. These weren't minor oversights. They were patterns that defied explanation. In intelligence terms, a pattern of carefully controlled but inconsistent data points is always a red flag. It signals someone is managing perception and possibly concealing reality. MI5's approach was methodical. They did not rely on rumors or media speculation. They began compiling a dossier of official statements, hospital records, timing of public appearances, and photographic evidence. Analysts cross-referenced each piece of data, searching for discrepancies. Dates didn't align. Locations conflicted with staff reports. Images, when compared side by side, revealed subtle anomalies, shadows that didn't match, reflections that hinted at artificial lighting, body angles that were improbable for a newborn. The next step involved interviews. Staff members, hospital personnel, and those with direct access to the royal couple were approached, often in discreet settings. Many were reluctant to speak, fearing retribution or public exposure. But the few willing to cooperate painted a picture that differed from the official narrative. Inconsistent accounts of Lilibet's movements, combined with cryptic references to staged events, added weight to the emerging theory. Something was not as it seemed. MI5 did not stop at documentation. Surveillance became a key tool. Agents observed public appearances, analyzed footage frame by frame, and noted details invisible to casual viewers. Movements of the baby, timing of reactions, and micro-expressions were all scrutinized. The goal wasn't to invade privacy. It was to detect inconsistencies that could indicate deception. And what they found, according to leaked sources, was compelling. Certain appearances could not be reconciled with normal infant behavior. The theory of a lifelike prop, initially speculative, began to gain traction. Inside MI5, the files were classified at the highest level. Redacted images, memos, and internal notes were stored in secure locations, accessible only to senior personnel. Analysts debated the implications. Was this a private family matter, or did it intersect with national interest? The argument for intervention gained strength with each anomaly uncovered. After all, the monarchy is not merely symbolic. It embodies centuries of tradition, continuity, and public trust. If deception had occurred at the level of a newborn's presentation, the repercussions could be profound, not just for the family, but for the nation. One of the most damning aspects came from metadata analysis. Photographs released publicly contained embedded data, timestamps, exposure settings, and lighting details that conflicted with official accounts. Footage supposedly captured during casual family outings showed angles that would have been nearly impossible to achieve without deliberate staging. Even minor inconsistencies, invisible to most eyes, were significant in intelligence terms. MI5 analysts compiled these observations into detailed reports, presenting the findings to senior officials. The reports also included comparisons to historical royal births. By contrasting Lilibet's public documentation with decades of precedent, MI5 highlighted anomalies that would have been unusual in any context. Sudden gaps in public appearances, absence of independent verification, and selective photo releases all contributed to a pattern of concealment. Analysts concluded that these patterns were unlikely to occur naturally or by accident. The question remained, why? As the files accumulated, internal discussions turned to ethics and protocol. MI5 is traditionally apolitical, focused on safeguarding the nation. Intervening in family affairs, even at the level of the monarchy, is fraught with risk. But the agency's mandate includes protecting national stability. Senior officers reasoned that the monarchy's credibility directly impacts Britain's soft power, global perception, and domestic unity. Therefore, anomalies suggesting deliberate manipulation of public perception warranted attention. The files also revealed a timeline of increasingly elaborate precautions. Events that were ostensibly casual or private were in fact tightly controlled. Photographs were orchestrated with precision, appearances were timed to minimize independent observation, and personnel involved were instructed on exact procedures. According to insider sources, this level of control exceeded standard privacy measures and indicated a deliberate effort to manage perception at all costs. One particularly revealing section of the MI5 files focused on patterns of media engagement. Analysts noticed that press releases coincided with low-traffic news cycles, while images were sometimes withheld until public attention had waned. Attempts by journalists to verify details were systematically redirected or denied. This suggested a sophisticated understanding of information flow and an effort to manipulate public perception, skills that, in other contexts, would be associated with strategic operations rather than family privacy. The files also included confidential notes from meetings with MI6, which provided an international perspective. Lilibet's limited visibility was not just a national anomaly, it was noted abroad. Intelligence partners observed inconsistencies in statements made to international media, raising further questions about authenticity. This intersection of domestic and international scrutiny elevated the matter from a private family concern to a subject of state-level intelligence interest. Emotional stakes were high within the agencies. Analysts understood that if these suspicions were confirmed, the revelation would be explosive. The integrity of the monarchy, public trust, and the credibility of the royal family could all be compromised. Yet, MI5 maintained objectivity, documenting observations without bias, carefully distinguishing between verified data and speculative inference. But even as files piled up, a central mystery remained: the real presence of Lilibet herself. If anomalies suggested staged appearances, where was the child during these orchestrated events? And if a prop was used, how many events involved it? The implications were unsettling, not only for the monarchy, but for anyone attempting to piece together an accurate timeline of Lilibet's early life. The pressure on intelligence analysts intensified as these questions circulated internally. Whispers of potential Darendal usage began to circulate, linking physical evidence with observational anomalies. Analysts cross-referenced photographic inconsistencies, hospital records, staff testimony, and metadata. The emerging mosaic suggested a deliberate and consistent pattern, a sophisticated effort to manipulate appearances. By the time the files were reviewed at the highest levels, MI5 faced a difficult decision. Disseminate the information and risk scandal? Keep it internal and risk the truth leaking through unofficial channels? The agency opted for caution, compiling comprehensive reports that would inform discussions with MI6, palace advisors, and senior government officials. The goal was clear: understand the full scope of the anomalies and determine whether intervention or disclosure was warranted. And while the files remain classified, leaks and whispers hint at the broader implications. Analysts reportedly concluded that if the suspicions regarding staged appearances were confirmed, the impact would be profound. Questions about authenticity, manipulation, and credibility could no longer be confined to tabloids or online speculation. They were matters that could affect the perception of Britain itself. And yet, for all the thoroughness of MI5's investigation, one key piece remained elusive: direct evidence of the child's whereabouts during staged events. The intelligence files pointed to a pattern, but confirmation required either internal disclosure or extraordinary investigative risk. That uncertainty only added tension, leaving the story hanging in a space between suspicion and certainty, fact and conjecture, public record and private knowledge. Which leads us to the next chapter, where MI6's international oversight begins to intersect with MI5's domestic findings, bringing new evidence and new revelations to light. When domestic anomalies were no longer enough to explain the inconsistencies surrounding Lillibut, MI6 entered the picture. Unlike MI5, which is tasked primarily with domestic security, MI6 operates on an international stage, gathering intelligence abroad and analyzing global threats. And in this case, the anomalies surrounding Meghan and Harry's daughter had implications that crossed borders, reaching far beyond Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace. The involvement of MI6 began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Analysts started noticing irregularities in statements given to foreign media outlets, particularly interviews with American news organizations. In these interviews, details about Lillibut's birth, early milestones, and appearances were sometimes inconsistent with information released in the UK. These discrepancies, while subtle, caught the attention of intelligence officers trained to identify patterns that others would miss. International partners, accustomed to collaborating on matters of state, began to flag the inconsistencies. Intelligence briefings noted that photographs, videos, and statements released across different countries didn't align. Dates were off, locations conflicted, and minor but telling details suggested either intentional obfuscation or a level of control unprecedented in royal public relations. MI6 analysts began compiling these irregularities into reports that would eventually inform domestic agencies of the potential scope of the deception. One of the most striking discoveries came from metadata analysis of photographs shared internationally. Differences in timestamps, file encoding, and even lighting conditions suggested that images had been staged or manipulated before release. While digital alterations in media are not uncommon, the meticulous nature of the discrepancies pointed to intentional orchestration, not accidental oversight. MI6 analysts began to consider the possibility that these images were part of a coordinated effort to create a public narrative that may not fully correspond to reality. Beyond the images, there were inconsistencies in logistical details. Flight records, travel itineraries, and hotel accommodations did not always match reported public appearances. Staff movements documented in foreign locations sometimes conflicted with what was publicly stated. These anomalies, when pieced together, suggested a carefully managed sequence of events that aimed to maintain an illusion. For MI6, accustomed to detecting deception in international operations, the evidence was compelling. The involvement of MI6 also brought into focus the potential risks of international exposure. If the inconsistencies were ever made public, it could create diplomatic awkwardness, undermine confidence in British institutions, and potentially provide fodder for foreign commentary on the credibility of the monarchy. Intelligence agencies recognize that the monarchy is not just symbolic, it represents the United Kingdom abroad. Any erosion of trust could have consequences reaching far beyond tabloids and social media. The combination of domestic and international anomalies created a sense of urgency within intelligence circles. MI5's domestic findings, coupled with MI6's observations abroad, painted a picture that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Analysts hypothesized that a deliberate effort to manage appearances may have involved sophisticated methods, possibly including the use of props or other techniques to maintain the illusion of the child's presence. This international dimension also illuminated the logistical complexity of the alleged deception. Coordinating appearances, controlling images, and ensuring consistency across continents would require meticulous planning. Analysts noted the improbability of achieving such consistency without careful orchestration, particularly in an era dominated by instantaneous communication and social media scrutiny. The scale of control implied that someone had carefully managed both domestic and international narratives, making every appearance, statement, and photograph part of a larger plan. MI6 also examined the potential role of intermediaries. Staff, photographers, and advisors may have been complicit, either knowingly or unknowingly, in maintaining the narrative. The intelligence community began mapping out networks of communication and influence, looking for patterns of coordination. Each email, memo, and instruction was scrutinized for signs of deliberate orchestration. The international perspective shed light on another critical element, the perception of credibility. Whereas domestic audiences might question inconsistencies subtly, international observers were less forgiving. Discrepancies in statements or images could quickly become points of speculation, feeding narratives that challenged the monarchy's authority and integrity. MI6's involvement underscored the importance of safeguarding not just the reality of events, but the perception of events on a global scale. The intersection of domestic and international intelligence also raised questions about the motivations behind the orchestration. Analysts considered multiple scenarios: protective measures, privacy concerns, public relations strategy, or something more deliberate and manipulative. Each possibility carried different implications, not just for the royal family, but for public trust and national stability. As reports circulated within MI6, the pressure to share findings with domestic agencies intensified. Collaboration with MI5 became crucial to build a comprehensive understanding of the anomalies. Analysts synthesized data, comparing domestic records with international observations, and identified consistent patterns that pointed toward manipulation of appearances. The international angle also provided context for the Darren doll allegations. Some analysts speculated that the alleged use of a prop could explain inconsistencies in images released abroad. If a lifelike stand-in were used, it would allow for coordinated appearances that maintained the illusion of Lilibet's presence while shielding her from public scrutiny. This theory, while extraordinary, fit within the emerging mosaic of evidence, lending plausibility to a scenario that, until recently, would have seemed unthinkable. The stakes of the investigation were now clear. If the allegations and inconsistencies were substantiated, the revelation would have global ramifications. Media outlets worldwide would scrutinize every image and statement. Diplomats would note the breach of trust in British institutions. Public confidence in the monarchy could be shaken, and the narrative of Meghan and Harry, carefully constructed over years, could unravel in a matter of days. Yet, for all the intelligence gathered, one key question remained unresolved: the whereabouts and status of the child during these orchestrated appearances. While patterns suggested manipulation, definitive proof remained elusive. Analysts knew that without corroboration from insiders or direct evidence, conclusions would remain speculative. And that, precisely, set the stage for the next chapter: the deep dive into the Darren doll itself, its alleged role, and the extraordinary lengths taken to maintain the illusion. Because while international intelligence had broadened the scope of the investigation, the core mystery, the presence or absence of Lilibet, remained at the heart of the unfolding drama. When it comes to deception, the devil is always in the details. And in the case of Meghan Markle and Lilibet, the details reportedly point to something extraordinary. a manufactured identity, embodied in what intelligence sources have referred to as the Darren doll. According to these allegations, the doll wasn't just a toy or a stand-in for a single photograph. It was a fully orchestrated tool used to create the illusion of Lilibet's presence in public appearances, media releases, and possibly even staged family events. The notion of a hyper-realistic prop being used in royal circles is shocking, almost unthinkable. Yet, intelligence insiders suggest the doll was meticulously constructed, with features, skin tone, weight, and even micro-movements designed to mimic a real infant. In Hollywood, such props are often used to ensure safety or to maintain continuity during filming. But in this case, the implications go far beyond mere convenience or artistic license. The alleged use of the Darren doll represents a deliberate strategy to manipulate public perception. The story begins with careful observation. Analysts reviewing publicly released images noticed minute inconsistencies, slight stiffness in posture, static expressions, and unnatural angles in supposedly candid moments. Shadows fell inconsistently across the baby's features, while reflections and lighting suggested controlled studio conditions rather than natural, spontaneous settings. To the trained eye of MI5 and MI6 operatives, these were not coincidental. They indicated careful orchestration. One critical factor in identifying the potential use of a prop is the behavior of infants. Newborns, by nature, are rarely still. They reflexively stretch, yawn, blink, and adjust posture in unpredictable ways. Yet, in images and videos released across multiple occasions, Lilibet reportedly appeared unnaturally composed. While some might attribute this to fortunate timing or photographic editing, repeated patterns across separate events raised suspicions. Analysts began considering the possibility that a doll, rather than the child herself, was used to maintain these staged appearances. Beyond photographic evidence, intelligence sources point to logistical considerations. Certain public appearances coincided with circumstances in which the real child's presence would have been impractical or unsafe. Travel schedules, private engagements, and medical considerations could have restricted the child's participation. The Darren doll, if used, would have allowed the parents to appear in compliance with public expectations while safeguarding the actual infant's well-being, or, more controversially, maintaining control over the narrative at any cost. The doll itself, reportedly sourced from a specialist Hollywood supplier, would have been a technical marvel. Weight, limb articulation, and even subtle facial expressions could be engineered to pass casual inspection. Such a prop would enable precise coordination of photographs, appearances, and gestures that align with the parent's intended narrative. From an intelligence perspective, the sophistication of such a device indicates a level of planning and intentionality that extends well beyond ordinary media management. Emotional stakes are high when considering the implications. To the casual observer, the notion of a doll being used might evoke disbelief or even humor. Yet, from a national perspective, the use of a prop in this context would be unprecedented. It challenges traditional expectations of transparency, raises ethical questions about deception, and threatens the integrity of an institution rooted in centuries of tradition. Analysts within MI5 and MI6 reportedly debated these implications extensively, weighing the potential fallout against the necessity of documenting anomalies. The alleged deployment of the Darren doll also sheds light on patterns of behavior observed throughout the early public life of Lilibet. Carefully timed photo releases, limited public appearances, and controlled media engagement all align with the possibility of a stand-in being used in select contexts. Intelligence assessments suggest that if a prop was employed, it was likely reserved for moments with high visibility or elevated risk of scrutiny, an elegant but risky solution to a complex problem. For the public, the use of a manufactured identity carries layers of psychological impact. People naturally assume authenticity in familial representation, particularly in a monarchy celebrated for tradition and ceremony. Discovering that appearances may have been staged undermines trust, challenges assumptions, and forces reconsideration of everything previously accepted as fact. From an emotional standpoint, it transforms a story once perceived as a private family affair into a narrative of manipulation, strategy, and, potentially, deception. The implications extend to media relations as well. Journalists, Photographers and content creators rely on visual and verbal cues to report events accurately. If a prop was used, it not only distorts the historical record but also manipulates the mechanisms through which society interprets public figures. Every article, every broadcast, every photograph becomes part of a curated illusion rather than a reflection of reality. Analysts also highlight the broader context of control and influence. The alleged use of the Darren doll is consistent with a pattern of behavior observed in Meghan and Harry's public engagements: meticulous planning, deliberate image management, and selective transparency. In intelligence terms, it represents a sophisticated operation, blending logistics, media manipulation, and psychological impact to maintain a narrative that serves specific objectives. Yet, despite the plausibility, significant questions remain. How often was the doll used? Was its deployment limited to certain appearances, or did it extend to ongoing interactions presented publicly as genuine? Were staff members complicit, or merely following strict directives without full knowledge? Intelligence sources indicate that these questions remain central to ongoing investigations, as corroboration and direct evidence are difficult to obtain in such a sensitive context. The allegations, whether fully substantiated or not, carry undeniable consequences. They challenge perceptions of authenticity, blur the line between reality and performance, and raise questions about the lengths to which public figures may go to control narrative and protect privacy. They also set the stage for subsequent revelations: the press conference, the leaked files, and the international scrutiny that would follow. Because while the Darren doll may seem like a singular curiosity, it is in fact a key piece of a broader puzzle, one that intertwines domestic intelligence, international oversight, and the intricate dynamics of a monarchy under unprecedented public attention. The manufactured identity serves not merely as a prop, but as a symbol of the extraordinary measures reportedly taken to shape perception, manage appearances, and, according to sources, maintain the illusion of normalcy in the early life of Lilibet. And as the investigation deepened, MI5 and MI6 began to piece together how this single tool, the doll, fit into a wider network of control, influence, and potentially deception. They were beginning to see a pattern, a strategic orchestration that went beyond what anyone could have anticipated, and it was this realization that set the stage for the dramatic revelations to come. Picture this: a room filled with the sharpest minds in British intelligence, journalists from every major network, and a hush that seemed to press against the walls. The tension was palpable. Cameras clicked, microphones poised, and every attendee knew they were about to witness something unprecedented: a public disclosure from MI5 and MI6 concerning the British monarchy. The question on everyone's lips was simple, yet impossible to grasp fully. What could possibly bring these agencies out of the shadows and into the glaring public spotlight? The answer, according to sources, was Lilibet. Not merely her birth, not merely her family circumstances, but the anomalies that intelligence analysts had been quietly documenting for months. The Darren doll allegations, staged appearances, and inconsistencies across photographs, videos, and statements. It was as if the agencies had spent years piecing together a puzzle, and now, the picture was complete enough to demand public attention. As the press conference began, an MI6 officer stepped forward, reviewing prepared statements with deliberate calm. Cameras recorded every gesture, every inflection, knowing that history would scrutinize each moment. Analysts inside the room later described a palpable sense of disbelief as the first revelations were outlined. According to leaked briefings, the agencies had collated photographic evidence, metadata analysis, travel records, and testimonies from staff who had been in direct contact with the royal household. The first slides displayed during the presentation reportedly caused immediate murmurs. Side-by-side comparisons of images highlighted subtle inconsistencies: shadows misaligned, limbs positioned unnaturally, and in some cases, the appearance of Lilibet at events that other records suggested she could not have attended. These discrepancies were presented systematically, each building upon the last, until the implication became undeniable. Observers in the room began to grasp the weight of the claim. Appearances may have been deliberately staged using a hyperrealistic prop, in effect creating an illusion of presence where there was none. The room was tense. Journalists leaned forward, eyes wide. Questions arose immediately, but the MI5 and MI6 officials maintained control, directing the narrative without yielding to speculation. They stressed the evidence-based nature of their findings, emphasizing that while conclusions were drawn from observed inconsistencies, direct access to certain private moments remained limited. Yet, even with these caveats, the impact was unmistakable. The emotional undertone of the press conference was complex. Intelligence agencies, by design, operate with detachment. But insiders described moments of visible discomfort among the officials presenting the findings. The British monarchy is, after all, an institution intertwined with national identity. Presenting evidence that potentially suggested deliberate manipulation of appearances by members of the royal family was no ordinary briefing. It was an unprecedented breach of tradition, protocol, and expectation. Observers outside the room reacted almost immediately. Social media erupted, speculations multiplied, and news organizations scrambled to interpret the significance. Headlines ranged from cautious curiosity to outright alarm. MI5/MI6 expose royal deception, read one early online post. Lilibet allegedly staged, asked another. The world was suddenly focused on a child who had barely been seen in public, and the implications were as wide-ranging as they were unsettling. During the press conference, the agencies presented more than just images. Metadata from photographs, patterns of staff movements, inconsistencies in public statements, all of these were laid bare. Analysts later noted that the presentation was meticulous, almost surgical in its detail. Every claim was cross-referenced, every anomaly documented, and every step meticulously justified. There was no room for casual dismissal. Yet, the drama was not merely procedural. As slides progressed, the human element became impossible to ignore. For decades, the monarchy had cultivated an image of tradition, trust, and ceremony. Now, that image was being challenged in a manner that was both intimate and deeply public. Analysts inside the room reportedly exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the unprecedented nature of the event. Never before had intelligence agencies taken the extraordinary step of publicly scrutinizing the private life of royal children. The press conference also introduced direct questions that analysts believe were strategic. By framing the anomalies in terms of observable evidence, agencies invited the public to engage critically without fully disclosing every sensitive detail. It was a careful balancing act, reveal enough to maintain credibility and transparency while protecting sources, methods, and classified information. Amid the shock, subtle humor and irony surfaced in the commentary from attending journalists. Some described moments when the projected images appeared so perfect that they could almost be mistaken for film stills, a nod to the extraordinary lengths allegedly taken to manage appearances. Yet, beneath the levity was a recognition of gravity. If these anomalies were confirmed, the ramifications would extend far beyond media speculation. Emotional tension escalated as officials referenced internal findings without directly naming individuals. Observers inferred the connection to Meghan Markle, though no statement explicitly identified her. Still, the implications were clear. A combination of privacy management, media control, and allegedly staged appearances had attracted the attention of the nation's top intelligence agencies. The climax of the press conference came with the mention of corroborating sources. Testimonies from insiders, staff, and analysts were summarized, reinforcing the narrative of deliberate orchestration. Each detail added weight, suggesting a carefully coordinated effort over time to maintain an image that may not fully align with reality. Analysts described a sense of inevitability. The story had moved beyond speculation into the realm of substantiated concern. As the conference concluded, the room was filled with a mix of disbelief, fascination, and tension. Questions about authenticity, privacy, and public trust remained at the forefront. What had been a private family matter now stood exposed on an international stage, framed by intelligence analysis and evidence. Observers recognized that the consequences would unfold over time, potentially reshaping public perception of the monarchy, its credibility, and its relationship with media and the public. And yet, even as the press conference ended, the most explosive revelations remained just out of reach. Sources hinted that slides yet unseen contained information that could change everything. internal communications, corroborating testimonies, and a clear timeline of orchestrated appearances that linked directly to the alleged use of the Darren doll. The world had seen the beginning, but the story was far from complete. Because what came next, the fallout, the reactions, and the private struggles behind the scenes, would reveal not only the extent of the orchestration, but also the human consequences of manipulating perception in a world where every action is scrutinized. When the intelligence revelations began to surface, all eyes were on Meghan. Yet, quietly, another figure stood at the center of this storm, Prince Harry. Known for his calm demeanor in public appearances and his protective instincts toward his family, Harry's silence was deafening. And for those watching closely, it was more than just discretion. It was tension, strain, and a possible conflict of loyalty that ran deep. From the beginning, Harry's role in the narrative surrounding Lilibet has been complex. As a father, his instinct is to protect his child at all costs. As a royal, he is bound by centuries of tradition, duty, and the expectations of an institution that demands both transparency and decorum. And as Meghan's husband, he is entwined in a carefully orchestrated media narrative that, according to intelligence sources, may have included staged appearances involving the Darren doll. The confluence of these responsibilities created a pressure cooker of emotional and ethical challenges that few outsiders could truly comprehend. Observers of Harry's behavior noted subtle but telling signs. In interviews and public statements, he carefully navigated topics relating to privacy, security, and family. He would speak in measured tones, choosing words that protected his spouse while upholding the broader integrity of the monarchy. Every sentence, analysts suggest, was weighed against the potential for misinterpretation or amplification in a media ecosystem attuned to sensationalism. The strain of maintaining this balance is evident when considering the juxtaposition of private and public pressures. On the one hand, Harry must uphold his role as a father, ensuring his child's safety and emotional well-being. On the other, he must respect the expectations of the crown, adhering to protocols and traditions that have governed royal conduct for centuries. The alleged use of a stand-in or manipulated appearances would have amplified the tension. If true, Harry would have been complicit in maintaining an illusion, or at least aware of it, while simultaneously managing both domestic expectations and public perception. Insiders suggest that Harry's silence is both strategic and protective. By not publicly addressing the allegations, he shields the child from additional scrutiny and avoids further inflaming an already volatile media landscape. Analysts note, however, that silence can carry its own weight, interpreted by some as tacit approval, by others as discomfort or internal conflict. In Harry's case, every choice carries dual consequences, the personal and the institutional. The human element cannot be overstated. Sources describe Harry grappling with what they term cognitive dissonance, caught between loyalty to his spouse and duty to the crown. Intelligence professionals note that such internal conflict can manifest in subtle ways: body language, timing of statements, and the calculated avoidance of public comment. Observers have picked up on micro-expressions, fleeting gestures that suggest strain, concern, and a heightened awareness of stakes beyond the ordinary. Emotional complexity extends beyond the public sphere. Private interactions, according to insiders, reveal conversations fraught with tension. Meetings with advisors, discussions with family members, and private negotiations with media representatives reportedly required careful calibration to maintain harmony, minimize risk, and navigate the unprecedented situation. Every interaction was a balancing act, with the potential for exposure or misunderstanding at every turn. This tension is compounded by the nature of the allegations themselves. The Darren doll claims and the purported manipulation of appearances are not mere gossip. They carry implications that touch on authenticity, trust, and the ethical presentation of family life. For Harry, managing these allegations involves not only navigating external perception, but also reconciling personal values and emotional responses. Analysts point to the extraordinary challenge of maintaining composure and discretion while under the scrutiny of global media, intelligence agencies, and public expectations simultaneously. Direct questions to the audience emerge naturally here. If you were caught between protecting a loved one and maintaining institutional credibility, where would your loyalty lie? Would you remain silent to safeguard privacy or speak out to ensure transparency? Harry's predicament embodies this dilemma, reflecting a tension that is deeply personal yet inescapably public. Moreover, the public's perception of Harry's silence adds layers of complexity. Silence can be interpreted as acquiescence, agreement, or complicit behavior. Each interpretation carries weight, potentially influencing public opinion, media narratives, and even the strategic calculations of those managing the monarchy's image. Analysts suggest that Harry's silence is both deliberate and nuanced, signaling protection without fully revealing insight, a strategy aimed at mitigating fallout while maintaining alignment with family priorities. Inside intelligence circles, Harry's behavior has been noted as a stabilizing yet unpredictable factor. His responses, or lack thereof, are considered critical variables in assessing the broader implications of the alleged manipulations. Any statement, deviation, or misstep could amplify the impact of the revelations, affecting not only public trust, but also the operational credibility of institutions intertwined with the monarchy. Emotional stakes peak when considering the father-child relationship at the heart of the controversy. Protecting Lilibet, whether from public exposure, media scrutiny, or potential misrepresentation, is a driving force behind Harry's decisions. Sources describe the meticulous care taken in every public appearance, every photograph released, and every interaction captured for posterity. The alleged use of a prop would have been consistent with these protective instincts, allowing Harry to maintain the facade of normalcy while shielding the child from unwanted exposure. Yet, the strain is tangible. Analysts note that prolonged tension of this magnitude can affect decision-making, interpersonal relationships, and psychological well-being. In Harry's case, the dual pressures of private loyalty and public duty converge in ways that challenge conventional understanding of royal life.